Have to share a room with my rival. We both want to get this spot as the CEO's personal assistant. The car was silent, save for the low music coming from the radio. The man sitting beside me and driving the car, Maxwell Briar, was staring straight at the road, his jaw set with irritation. Bored, I glanced at him. He had a model-worthy profile, tan skin, a strong curved nose, glass-cutting jaw, and thick, dark brown with lashes to match. I had to admit, he had a pretty face, despite how often I wanted to punch it. Suddenly his gaze cut to me, and then to my leg. I glanced down and saw that unconsciously I had started to bounce my knee along with the music. Maxwell narrowed his eyes slightly. Then, in one smooth movement, he reached out and cut the music off, before settling back into the driver's seat as if nothing happened. I breathed out a sigh. Would I really be able to spend a week alone with this guy, without killing him? 3 days ago, Maxwell and I stood side by side in front of our boss, Merryl Powers, appropriately named. Seeing as she was one of the most powerful women in the world of online shopping, she looked up from her computer, and her bright red lips spread into a warm smile. If you told me this woman could buy me, I probably would believe you. Despite her warm and friendly nature, she radiated power. Maxwell, Anthony, I need you both to help me with something. Maxwell and I glanced at each other. It already sounded like she expected us to work together. That did not bode well. We'll help as much as we can, Miss Powers. I spoke up before Maxwell could, and looking back at Merrill, straightening my back slightly. What is it? Merrill grabbed her coffee from the table and took a slow, lazy sip. Then, setting the cup down, she leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. I'll be leaving on a business trip in a few weeks, as you should both be aware of. It's just a few cities away, but I need to find somewhere to stay before then. I blinked, unsure of where she was going with this request. Maxwell, unfortunately, was one step ahead of me. Would you like us to check out some hotels in the area in advance? He asked. Merrill smiled, pleased. Exactly. I cursed internally. Why hadn't I thought about that? I'd like you both to go out and scope the area for me. I heard there are a few good hotels out there. She tilted her head. Can you do that for me, boys? Yes, ma'am, I answered. Of course, ma'am, said Maxwell simultaneously. As we left her office, a smile appeared on Maxwell's handsome face. It wasn't as warm as Merrill's had been. You should probably leave this to me, Tony. He pushed some of his dark hair out of his face. Miss Powers no doubt needs a high-quality establishment to satisfy her tastes. I scowled. Shove it. I know plenty about high-quality establishments. Right, Maxwell chuckled, that annoying rich person chuckle of his. Have you ever been to a 5-star hotel? I grit my teeth. My silence was apparently an answer in of itself, because Maxwell laughed again. I seethed with anger, but did my best to keep myself under control. After all, we were still in front of Miss Powers' office. I wanted so badly to be the one to find the hotel she would like. I could already picture her pleased smile. And then, when 1 year is over, I'd be getting promoted from just intern to her personal assistant. No freaking way Maxwell, who had wormed his way into this position, who was somehow competing with me for the same spot as Miss Powers' assistant, despite the fact I had worked hard even to get this chance, while he had been recommended to Miss Powers through the wonderful powers of nepotism. I was determined to surpass him, so one can only imagine my disappointment when one little research made it obvious that there was only one good hotel in the area, and when we had both told Miss Powers, she instructed us to go check it out together. Think of it as a team bonding exercise, she told us cheerfully. It would do you well to get along with each other more. hoping I didn't look as unwilling as I felt. Present time. And so began my wonderful week with the man I hated the most. Maxwell parked in front of the building. Just from the look of it, I could tell it was a high-brow and expensive place, but I didn't allow myself to show any awe or surprise. Maxwell wouldn't let me hear the end of it if I did something like that. "I'll handle booking the rooms. You can just leave that to me," he said, as he shut the car door and walked over to me. He always kept a feet away from me. I suspected he hated being reminded that I was taller than him. His words on their own were kind enough, but his tone was irritatingly patronizing. I glared at him. "What the hell? For the last time, stop treating me like a kid." Maxwell shrugged. "Who knows what kind of rooms they'll give us if you're the one to talk to them at the front desk." I had to deal with this kind of condescension from him constantly. Hearing it for the umpteenth time didn't make it any less infuriating. Steaming, I stormed past him into the building without another word. I'd already gotten to the front desk by the time he rushed in. "2 rooms, please." I smiled at the girl sitting behind the counter, ignoring Maxwell, who came up behind me. "For each of us, 1 week."
"Of course. Just a moment, please."
She swiveled in her chair and typed at her computer for a moment.
"What are you doing?"
Maxwell hissed behind him, quiet enough for only me to hear. "Getting our rooms, idiot," I mumbled back. "Be quiet." Suddenly, the girl in front of us frowned. She turned back to her chair and offered an apologetic smile.
"Unfortunately, we're all booked out for the week."
I blinked in surprise. Maxwell shoved past me to step in front of the counter.
"Really? Not even one?"
he pressured. She glanced between the both of us.
"Well, there is one, but..."
I frowned. "What's wrong with it?"
"Well, nothing. It's actually one of our best, but..."
"Then we'll take it." Maxwell cut her off. "Don't worry about the cost. It's imperative we get a room here." For once I agreed with him. Neither of us wanted to go back to Miss Powers and tell her that we hadn't been able to carry out her task. The girl glanced between the both of us for a moment. Soon, Maxwell and I were heading up to the elevator, each of us possessing a key card to our room. The air was heavy. I didn't know what he was thinking, but I suspected he was probably perturbed by the idea of sharing a room. Seriously? Just imagining using the same bathroom made me disgusted. Goosebumps rise on my arm. Little did we know, that was the least of our problems. From when we stepped into the room, a large, glaring problem presented itself. The room was beautiful, the pictures of luxury, and the large windows gave a breathtaking view of the city below. It was stylish, furnished, and sweet. Perfume scented lingered in the air. In the center of the room was a large, neatly made bed. A bed just for one. Beside me, Maxwell cursed. He almost never did that. "You've got to be kidding me." And again, I found myself agreeing with him. Aside from simply staying at the hotel, Miss Powers had given us no further assignment. By all accounts, that week was more or less a paid vacation. Literally, since all expenses from the hotel would be from her pocket. A free week at a luxurious hotel. Sounds awesome, right? Well, it had have been. "Don't touch me." Beside me. Maxwell gritted his words out. "Be quiet." I was particularly on the edge of my side of the bed, as he was. I stared at the wall. Why would I willingly touch you? "Don't even touch me by accident." I sat up, reaching out to flick the light switch. The entire room bathed in darkness. I was sure I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. We had explored all our options. There was really no other rooms. And the furniture, while comfortable, was not big enough for either of us to sleep on. Besides, even if that was an option, there was no way I would give up the bed for him. That would just feed into his monstrous ego. And because of that ego, I knew Maxwell would never in a million years give the bed up for me. This really was our only option, as uncomfortable as it was. I consoled myself with the fact that this was just another step towards securing my job. And then, despite myself, the comfort of the bed and the warm sheets lured me into a deep, exhausted sleep. It was still dark outside. I woke up to legs tangled up against my own. I forced myself to open my eyes and was met with Maxwell's sleeping face. I felt a surge of shock. We were closer than we'd ever been. How on earth did I end up in this position? I guessed in the course of tossing and turning at night. It could have happened, but still, I found myself staring. Maxwell was in a deep sleep, and his cheeks smushed against the pillow, and his lips parted. He snored softly, in bed with a handsome guy. I probably wouldn't have minded the situation if it had not been literally anyone else. Asleep like this, he looked almost sweet. It was really a shame he had such a nasty personality. Heaving a sigh, I pulled myself away from him and sat up, running my fingers through my light brown curls. Maxwell stirred beside me as I moved. I glanced at his face and saw his brows furrow slightly.
"Stay still,"
he grumbled, still asleep. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. What the heck kind of dream is he having? The sun had just come up by the time Maxwell finally woke. Sitting up, I was at the desk in the room working on my laptop. I glanced at him, smirking at his bedhead. "Good morning. I thought you died in your sleep or something." Groggy, Maxwell gave me a confused look.
"It's 6 a.m.
How long have you been awake?"
"What are you doing?"
"Working," I spat back. "Looking at my computer, my second job. Unlike you, some of us actually have to work for our money." I didn't need to look at Maxwell to know his gaze was lingering on me. Well, I didn't care. It's not like I was lying. Maxwell's family was super rich. I was sure he'd gotten everything he ever wanted growing up. As a kid, I had worked with my dad at his hardware shop, just so we could make rent. It was no secret he looked down on me. He surely felt a little wronged, indignant over the fact that someone like me was an obstacle to him getting such a good job. Well, he could go cry about it for all I cared, no matter how much he felt he was better than me. If I could land a job like this, then all the painstaking hours I spent studying in college wouldn't be in vain, and all the extra hours Dad had spent working to get me through college, I'd be able to properly show my gratitude to him. Right now, though I had to deal with Maxwell.
"You'll ruin my sleep schedule if you keep waking me up before sunrise."
I shrugged. I'm already used to it. Besides, that's not really any of your business, is it? I heard him pull himself out of his bed. Silently, he shuffled onto the bathroom, shutting and locking the door. Minutes later, I heard a sound of a shower being switched on. Now, with some privacy to myself, I thought about what I would have to do. The rooms, based on this one alone, seemed to be rather high quality, but I would have to check the other facilities at the hotel. Restaurant? Bar? There seems to be a pool as well. Miss Powers probably wouldn't use all of those during her stay, but she liked people who were thorough, and in this case, being thorough meant enjoying everything the hotel had to offer to the fullest. I smiled to myself. Seriously, this would have been the perfect assignment to carry out on my own. Well, just because we're sharing a room. It certainly didn't mean Maxwell and I had to do everything together. I intend to stay as far away from him as I could. After about 15 minutes of work, I switched my laptop off and stood up, stretching. I wanted breakfast, or maybe I could order room service or something. There was also a buffet according to the website. I needed a shower first. I glanced at the bathroom door. Maxwell was still in the shower, so all I could do was wait, and wait, and wait. Soon 15 minutes became 25 minutes, and 25 minutes became 40. The shower had gone off at some point, but the door wasn't opening, and I couldn't hear anything coming from inside the bathroom. I stared at the door in disbelief. What on earth is he doing? "Maxwell," I called out, raising to my feet. "Did you fall asleep on the bowl or something? I need to shower. Get out of there." Silence. I walked over to the bathroom door and pressed my ear against it. Silence. I couldn't tell if it was because the door was particularly thick, or if there really wasn't any sound coming from the other side. "Maxwell?" I called again. Brows furrowed. More silence. Great. He was ignoring me. Was he? I heard a few stories of people slipping and getting injured in the bathroom, with no one finding out to help them until it was too late. And maybe it was a stretch, but for some reason I felt the slight urge of concern. After all, he was too quiet. I could even hear him moving around or something. I knocked. "Don't ignore me. Maxwell!" My tone came out more worried than I would have liked it to. The door opened the next second. My vision was immediately clouded by steam that poured out of the bathroom. I shut my eyes and waved my hands through it, stepping away from the heat. When I opened my eyes, I saw Maxwell standing in front of me, an expression of disbelief on his face, though I admit it took a second for me to actually look at his face. He was wearing nothing but a towel, his muscled torso still moist from the water and steam. Water droplets clung to his thick lashes, dropping whenever he blinked. He was wearing one of those fluffy headbands I've seen girls wear when taking care of their skin, a dark-colored one. I immediately felt like an idiot. He was just doing skincare routine. "Patience is a virtue," he said, folding his arms over his bare chest. "Or were you worried about me?" "I don't have patience for people who spend hours in the bathroom," I retorted, frustrated with myself for feeling worried about him at all. I ignored his second question, resting my forearms against the doorframe above his head, and leaned forward slightly, blocking his way. "Look, I don't know how you do it back home, but we're gonna have to share a room for the next couple of days. You have got to show a little consideration." Right. He waved his hands dismissively, stepping past me, strolling into the room. "Duly noted." I turned to watch him go. My interest was briefly drawn to the small birthmark on his back. I tore my gaze away, towel in hand. I stepped into the bathroom. I couldn't afford to have him find out that I actually thought he was a little hot. My pride wouldn't allow it. 2 days later. The next 2 days were mostly the both of us avoiding each other. On more than one occasion, I nearly fell off the bed just trying not to touch him. Despite this, every morning the distance between us would reduce drastically. I couldn't understand it. I was just thankful I woke up before him, otherwise I'd have to deal with his reactions. Showers were more awkward than I would have liked. Sure, I was gay, but I'd never felt particularly shy when it came about my body. Yet, I felt annoyingly self-conscious during the brief moment I had appeared without a shirt on in front of Maxwell. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why. Sure, he liked guys as well, but I was certain I was anything but his type. I was sure of this, even though it did feel like I saw him staring sometimes. But I was sure it was my own imagination. My shyness confused me and gave me more of a reason to stay out of his way. I noticed, though, that he would disappear randomly during the day, and sometimes at night. My curiosity soon morphed into mild anxiety. Just what exactly was he doing? One evening, I noticed he dressed better than he usually did. He left the room without a word, as usual, but I was determined to find out what he was doing. I needed to know if he was doing anything that could jeopardize my chances of getting the job. Was there some information about the hotel he'd discovered? Some good or bad point I had no idea about that he could present to Miss Powers? I had to find out. I dressed smartly and casually and slipped out of the room a few minutes after him. My search didn't take long, as I found myself at the bar. Well, one of them. There were multiple in the building, some of which I've already explored, but I purposely avoided this one in particular because it looked way out of my league. Sure enough, it was. The moment I stepped into the room, I got the overwhelming feeling that I did not belong. This place looked more expensive than even the swankiest places I'd visited back home. The people around all look rich, like Maxwell rich. But just as I decided to turn and leave, I spotted Maxwell himself. He had been seated at a table, laughing with a group of well-dressed men and women. Their ages varied, but Maxwell was clearly the youngest person there. As if sensing my gaze, he suddenly looked at me. I watched his expression quickly shifted to surprised, then to annoyed, before his easy smile returned and looked away from me. The split-second glare told me everything I needed to know. He wanted me to leave. I would not. Just what was he playing at? Despite the amount of money I was sure I would spend just from buying a single drink. I found a single-person table close to his, ordered a drink, and tried my best to eavesdrop. It was all rich people babble and gossip. I scoffed to myself as I very, very slowly nursed my drink. Maxwell was talking a lot, more than I ever heard him talk before. And as I listened to him talk more, I began to sense something in Maxwell's tone that I had never in a million years thought I would ever hear. It sounded like desperation, like he was trying his hardest to fit in with the group and get the approval of all these people. Another voice cut through their conversation.
Hold on. Isn't that Maxwell?
I glanced up in time to see a dark-haired man stroll over to Maxwell's table. Looking at Maxwell's face, I saw a mixture of surprise and dread. Interested, I sat up a little more. "Oh, Aaron." Someone at the table piped up.
I didn't know it was you, Maxie.
Uninvited, Aaron found a spot at the table to sit with the others.
Of course I know Maxie. We're old friends. I went to his house to play often, when we were kids. Didn't expect to see him here of all places. You on vacation?
This Aaron guy looked vaguely familiar. I felt like I'd seen him somewhere on the internet before. Probably just some celebrity. Whatever. I was much more interested in Maxwell, who looked like he wished he could make Aaron disappear at will. Maxwell gave a strange smile. "Just a work trip." "It's nice to see you again, Aaron. Have you been doing well?" Aaron nodded.
"Quite well, recently."
Aaron then proceeded to launch into a long description of all of his recent achievements. I could only wonder if the rest of them were as bored as I was. And then, just as I had finally decided to get up and leave.
"How have you been, Maxwell? Your parents still giving you a hard time?"
All eyes were on Maxwell again. His smile went from strained to tight. His parents give him a hard time?" A lady asked, curious. "They're just a little strict," Maxwell started to say. Aaron cut him off with a disbelieving noise.
"Strict? Max, my parents were strict. Your parents were consistently on your case for not being like your sister. I thought they hated you at some point."
Maxwell's expression turned dark. At once, the friendly tone he had just been trying to maintain was gone. "Aaron," his voice cold with barely contained anger. "I know you have trouble controlling your tongue at most times, but it might do you well to go easy on the alcohol for the rest of the night. Your lips are a little more loose than usual." With those scalding words, he downed the rest of his drink and rose to his feet abruptly. "I'm calling it a night, if you'll excuse me," not giving another glance at the people at the table. Briefly, our eyes met, but all he did was send me a withering glare before leaving the bar completely. I leaned back in my chair, curiously mulling over what I just heard. So, he had been in a rocky relationship with his parents. That explained a lot. Well, now I knew he had been networking apparently. I should have felt like I had come here for nothing. But after finding that out, I couldn't think that it was a complete waste of time. It never hurt to know a little more about your opposition, and it felt like I had found out something important about Maxwell. With that justification in mind, I paid for my overpriced drink and left the bar as well. Maxwell was not in the room when I got there. Inexplicably, I felt compelled to find him. I immediately shook off the urge. Even if I did find him, what the heck would I say? He'd probably just spit venom at me. With a sigh, I changed my clothes and got into bed. Next morning, I woke up to the sound of vomiting. It was coming from the bathroom. There was only one person it could be. Of course. Still, I was more than a little disbelief as I got out of bed and walked over to the bathroom. I peeked in through the slightly open door, and lo and behold, Maxwell kneeling over the front of the toilet, holding onto the bowl for dear life as he retched. Just how wasted did he get last night? Maxwell raised his head when he heard my voice. He peered at me over his shoulder. I actually felt pity for him. His skin was damp with sweat, strands of black hair sticking to his forehead. Frankly, he looked terrible. That pretty face of his was a mess. He still had energy to glower at me.
What are you doing here?
He croaked.
Get out!
I rolled my eyes. I was supposed to just ignore the noise coming from the bathroom.
Yes?
It looked like he wanted to say more, but he was cut off as he heaved. He turned back to the bowl. I reached out with my foot and lightly poked him in the back. "There's a pharmacy downstairs," I said. "If you ask nicely, I can go get some medicine for you." I saw Maxwell's jaw clench. I waited for him to tell me to leave again.
Please.
His voice was low, more than a mumble. I blinked in surprise. "Oh, wow. You really must feel terrible," I laughed.
Isn't it obvious? Are you getting the medicine or not?
I had only made the offer to piss him off, but it seemed he really needed my help. I sighed and turned to leave the room. 30 minutes later, he was hunched up in bed, his stomach stabilized. I ordered breakfast, but he seemed wary to eat, for understandable reasons. "I didn't know you were a drunk," I said. "I'm not." He tentatively sipped some water. He had dark circles under his eyes. "Then how come you drank so much?" I paused and considered it for a moment. Did it have anything to do with what that Aaron guy said about your parents? That struck a nerve. He sat upright.
You heard that? What were you even doing there?
He demanded. I shrugged. I was bored and decided to go out for a drink. Is that a crime? He looked away from me. He took a deep breath and another gulp of his water. I doubt you'd understand. He started again. Suddenly, but when you come from a family like mine, you've got a lot of expectations you have to meet. My parents expect a lot from me. That's all. I raised an eyebrow at him. I would have never guessed. Didn't you end up as an intern because of your parents' help? Maxwell never missed the opportunity to tell me that. Yeah, and I don't think they'd be very happy if they found out that I lost that position to you. He grumbled, pressing his finger to his temple. I would quite literally never hear the end of it. There was a moment of silence. That explained it. I had often wondered why Maxwell seemed so bent on securing this job. After all, it wasn't like he was lacking money or anything. Maxwell's expression was thoughtful. So what about you? I looked back at him. What? You know why I'm here now. He hesitated. He said hesitantly. He grabbed a piece of toast off the tray, started to eat. I'm asking about you. Is it the pay? I rolled my eyes. What a charming attempt at getting to know me better. But maybe it was because of the state I found him in this morning. But I felt more willing to answer than I would have been any other day. I mean, yeah, it's a pretty good job. I'd be able to help my dad with the money. Maxwell hesitated. Are you guys... is your situation not good? I appreciated him switching to more of a tasteful way of asking questions. It's not bad. Could definitely be a lot better, though. The silence resumed. I'd spent months competing with a guy for nearly 6 months at this point. We'd poked and prodded at each other, frustrated by the situation we found ourselves in. The guy irritated me most of the time. Even more frustrating was the fact that in a different circumstance, I might have actually wanted to befriend him. I hated admitting it to myself, but it was the truth. Sometimes I wondered if he felt the same way. A lot of times. His harshness towards me felt forced, to a cartoonish degree. I couldn't help but feel he was playing it up sometimes. We were always competing, but at that moment, there truly wasn't anything to fight over. It only took a few days at the hotel to know it was a top-notch place. So was there any point to our endless antagonism? I turned my head to look at him. Okay, look, I started. We got, 4 more days in this place? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of consistently being at each other's throats. He glared at me curiously. What are you saying? I'm saying truce. At least till we're done here. I had no idea how he was going to react to my proposal. To my surprise, he sighed out a laugh. Oh? So you don't actually hate me? I moved my legs to get you stomach medicine. Why would I do that if I hated you? I always thought you were too nice for your own good. Like the other night. You were worried something happened to me in the bathroom, weren't you? I flushed slightly, so he had noticed. I just didn't want to explain to Miss Powers how you ended up dying here, I joked. I'd probably be blamed for murdering you. Maxwell smirked. Right. Well, fine then. We can have a truce. But once this trip is over, I will be securing this position. You're on. It's a bit embarrassing to admit, but that truce was all it took for the walls to come crumbling down completely. The next night, again, Maxwell and I had gone to sleep at a reasonable distance each other, and again, I woke up to his legs tangled in mine. By this point, it didn't surprise me. I still had no idea who was moving for us to end in this kind of position, seeing as I always went to sleep with my back to him, yet whenever I woke up, I was facing him. It was the middle of the night. The room was dark, but I could make out his face well enough, so I could see his eyes were clearly open. We blinked at each other for a couple seconds. Quiet. I have a feeling this has been happening for a while now, he said, breaking the silence. That's right, I said, despite neither of us having made any moves to shift away. In our defense, it was a chilly night. Unusually chilly for this time of year. That was the reason we stayed so close to each other. That was also the reason we ended up scooting even closer to each other, completely eliminating the remaining distance between us. That was definitely the reason. The next morning, the sun was high in the sky by the time I opened my eyes. Miraculously, Maxwell had gotten up before me for a change. I noticed his absence from the bed immediately. Confused, I rolled over to find him sitting on the couch, staring at the television with a mug in his hand. It looked like he'd thrown on a shirt for decency's sake, leaving his legs bare. Without looking back at me, he spoke. You're finally awake. I was worried I warned you out. He chuckled. I huffed and sat up, dragging myself out of the bed and going to sit beside him. He said nothing about the obvious elephant in the room. The moment we decided to stop being at each other's throats, we hopped on each other instead. The implication of that were embarrassing, and a little hilarious, honestly. But he looked relaxed. Our truce was still on after all. Whatever happened in this room would stay in this room, it seemed. If that were the case, what was the use of worrying about it? We'd deal with all the awkwardness once we got back. I slid closer to him and propped my chin onto his shoulder. I'm surprised you're not worn out, I said. Did I not do a good enough job? Maxwell smirked.
What if I said you didn't?
I grinned. I'd call you a liar. A light roll in his eyes. He shifted. As if he were about to get up, I wound both of my arms around his waist, since we were already laying everything on the table. There was no point in holding anything back. He paused and looked at me, brows raised.
What are you doing?
I want to get us breakfast. I angled my head up a little closer to his face. He sighed as if exasperated, but he leaned into, lightly pecked my lips regardless. Satisfied, I gave him another kiss for the road, before letting him go and sitting up. Don't get used to that. A small smile hung on Maxwell's lips as he moved to grab the phone. And get dressed before room service arrives. Roger that. I had a feeling I was going to enjoy the next couple of days. Maxwell and I returned to Miss Powers with nothing but good news to say about the hotel. She praised us both, and apparently had a comfortable time during her trip. In the months following our stay at the hotel, our relationship stayed in an odd spot. We were still competing with each other, of course, but it wasn't quite as heated as it once had been. Well, of course it couldn't have been. Even though we never brought it up, neither of us would be forgetting about what happened between us anytime soon. To our surprise, at the end of the year, Miss Powers revealed her intentions to hire both of us, stating that we both have unique skills that would be useful to her, and with that pressure lifted off both of us, we finally let ourselves admit and explore the dormant, but ever-present attraction between us. We started a new year as co-workers, and a couple. I never would have expected us to hit it off that well. The end. Have you ever found yourself in a rivalry with another person? Thank you for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of the Rainbow Force, and stay wholesome.